part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Ja.
Well, welcome back to Focus on Liberia. We're going to be talking about Alfred F. Russell. I want to welcome our presenter for this show, that's Carl Family Call. Welcome to the show.
It's always my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we want to welcome back Priscilla, my co-host, who has been on a very well-deserved sabbatical or hiatus. Priscilla, welcome back to the Liberia History Channel.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me again.
We want to welcome all our viewers from across the globe. Of course, this is Focus on Liberia. We are doing the Liberia History Channel. We have started with a series, The Presidents of Liberia. We did Joseph Jenkins Roberts all the way to Anthony W. Gardner. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the 10th president, that's Alfred F. Russell. Alfred F. Russell is the one we're going to be looking at tonight. Invite a friend, share the show, and let's get started. Oh, Priscilla, say something before we go. I mean, I'm excited.
I am too. I am. I'm so excited when call tagged me the first time. I was like, yes, it's great to be back. So she had me going to just check on doing a little reading by myself, and it's interesting to really get to know these people as persons. So I'm excited to hear what God have to share with us today. You and I were talking the other night, and then we're saying we just used to recite the names of these people. We just used to recite the names and sing in school, and I didn't even realize that you take for granted that these are real, actual human beings that have story beyond beyond their position. So with this kind of program that Focus on Liberia is bringing to us, it just helps you to humanize um, the information that you got even from growing up. So I think this is a really, really needed program, and I can thank God enough every time I see the post or hear her to be sharing this kind of information. I think it's just generous of her to be investing her resources, her time, and giving this kind of education to us free of charge. And you, Dennis, to make the platform, to create a space for us for God to be able to share uh, this kind of level of knowledge that we're getting when it comes to our history. So yeah, I'm glad to be a part of it.
And I am excited as well. Most of the time we're reciting after James X. Payne, as we get to Gardner Alfred F. Russell now, then the song
It
starts
becomes
getting
a
a little
song.
messy.
Yeah.
Carl, welcome. Let's get started. We are so happy to have you. Want to welcome our viewers once more. This is the Liberia History Channel, and we are dealing with Alfred F. Russell.
Yes, we are going to talk about President Russell, but before I start talking about President Russell, I just wanted to give everyone an update. As you all know, as part of this process, I have been doing everything I can to get. I knew that all of the presidents were photographed, but nobody had all the photographs in one place, and most of the representations of the presidents that we have are from 1952, which were just sketches that were drawn. And so those sketches were what most people were basing all of their understanding of what our early presidents looked like. It was all based on these sketches. Being someone who has studied Augustus Washington, who was a photographer in early Liberia, he went to Liberia in 1853. He took his photography equipment with him, and he did photograph a significant number of prominent young Liberians, who many of which went on to become president. But at the time he photographed them, of course, they were not president yet. The first photos he took of Governor Roberts, Governor Joseph Jenkins Roberts, before independence, when he was governor of the Commonwealth. And he also mentioned that he took a photograph of Reverend James Briggs Payne. He talked about, I mean, those his notes, you know, he talked about, he took a photo of Daniel Warner, a young Daniel Warner, which he described as a merchant. And so he went on, of course, as we know, to become president. Same thing with many of the other presidents. Now, the Library of Congress has all of, as far as we know, the existing surviving photographs that were taken by Augustus Washington. Many of those photos are of unidentified Liberians.
Oh.
And so we just say, well, they're unidentified. It's impossible to know who these people are. You know, that's just wow, this is a great looking, you know, early Liberian. I wonder who this person was. And so that's how most people have looked at it. And so with this process, I made it a point to say, okay, it is possible that their photos have all been lost forever and we'll never see them, right? However, in looking at early sketches, from the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s of the presidents. For example, I shared with you all when I was doing James Briggs Payne, how we found the Harper Weekly sketch of Mr. Payne, President Payne, in 1868. That sketch looks very different from the 1952 drawing, which almost looks like a European, a person of European, full-blooded European almost, you know. So when we saw the sketch, and I was like, whoa, he was really, really a black man, you know. So where did they get the sketch from? So we started to research and said, oh, they based this 1868 sketch on a photograph. And something just occurred to me. Look at the unidentified photos and see if any of them look like the sketch. Because the 1868 sketch and the 1952 sketch did not resemble at all. So I looked through the unidentified photographs and I saw a picture and I said, my God, I think this is him. I looked at the face, but I'm not an expert, right? But with my layperson eyes, I thought that I found him. So what I did was I put the sketch together with a photo and I submitted it to a person that works for the state of Georgia as a forensic facial specialist. So basically what this person does is they can identify sketches and crime scene. I mean, whatever she does, it's over my head. But I knew that if there was a way to identify and use someone's technical skill to affirm and confirm that this sketch and this photo, as I initially thought, were the same person. And I also talked to my husband, and I think I sent it to Dennis and lots of my friends. I sent it to the whole Save the State. I said, hey, what y'all thinking? You know, everybody was like, yeah, I see it, but we needed an expert. And so she took her time, free of charge, reviewed it and said, listen, I can not tell you that this is James Briggs Payne, but what I can tell you is that this sketch and this photograph are of the same person. And that's how I was able to discover James Briggs Payne. And I also was on a mission to find Daniel Bashir Warner. And the same exact process, I was able to identify Daniel B. Warner. We'll go to the first slide, Dennis, if you don't mind. So we have Daniel B. Warner. And so, of course, the far right of your screen is the 1952 sketch drawing of Daniel Bashir Warner that we all are familiar with. If you Google him right now, that's what's going to show up. It's just a drawing. And the earliest drawing of him I could find was from 1880. And you can see the difference. But what's interesting between the 1952 and 1880, we've covered this before, they're posed similar, really. So somebody drew him based on an earlier sketch, but decided to make him look less African. So the artist clearly has seen the 1880 sketch. Because I mean, it's not like they just invented, oh, we don't know what he looked like, so I'll just make something up. I'm thinking, based on the way they're posed, that they were actually basing it on this earlier sketch that's in the center. And then when I started going through the unidentified photographs that the Library of Congress has, the far left, they just have it as an unidentified Liberian man. And I looked at the lips, I looked at the eyes, I looked at the facial, shape, everything, and I said, my God, I think this is Daniel B. Warner. But once again, I had to submit this for expert opinion after asking everyone I knew, all my friends in Save the State and my husband and everyone else, and they agreed. I then submitted it. And once again, she was able to offer her services to us and confirm based on the center sketch and the sketch the actual photograph on the far left, that this is in fact the same person. And that is amazing, because this is the first time in my lifetime that Daniel Warner has been re-identified. This is amazing. I'm excited. I'm over the moon. If there's nothing else that I contribute to Liberian history, this is just, I'm just so proud, because the other thing is, you read all of these secondary sources from after, the 1900s, right? From the 20th century. And they're all saying that this was a mulatto man. There's this narrative that all of our first presidents were mulatto. And why they did that, I've come up with all kinds of theories. I cannot say for certain why they did that. I mean, it's absurd. Again, it was during that time when colonialism was taking hold, but they wanted to erase the Blackness and attribute the genius of these early men to non-existent European fathers. Did we have presidents who had white fathers? Of course we did. We had 2 presidents who had white fathers, but they made it look like all of these early presidents were sons of white men, and it was not until E.J. Roy that we had a Black president. And so when you look at all of the presidents, you realize that narrative is false. And if Liberian people are not taken aback by this, and if that doesn't drive you to question everything you've been told about your country, nothing will. So I look at this as, this is like, they try to bury these men. They try to erase them and present them differently from what they were. It's almost like lynching them from the grave, destroying their likeness. And how could we have had these photographs? And I don't want to believe that nobody knew who this was. I think they just wanted to continue this narrative, because if you've been saying for the last, 75 years the last, 80 years or whatever, you've been saying for the last however long that Daniel Bashir Warner was a mulatto, why would you then positively identify his photograph? You would say, let's say he's unidentified. Let's cover this up. The narrative we've been pushing has been false. Something's going on. But we're going to get to the bottom of it. The bottom line is, this is Daniel B. Warner. This is who he was. He was not a mulatto. If he had been a mulatto, we'd still be proud of him. But the fact is, this is not who he was. He was an African. He was repeatedly described as a full-blooded African. And now we have the evidence, the photographic evidence as well.
Thank you, Carl. So now we have it, 1854. That's Daniel B. Warner on the left.
A young Daniel B. Warner before he was president.
That's the young Daniel B. Warner, the one credited of writing the national anthem. So
yes, and we have a whole show on him. Please go and watch. He was a multi-genius.
Yeah.
I can only imagine why they wanted to erase what he looked like, because he was extremely, extremely gifted. Among all of our presidents, I think he would top the list of the gifted presidents that we had.
Yeah, so by 1880, the Papena. Good.
He built a ship. He built ships. He reverse engineered and built his own ships. Go watch the episode. He's an incredible person. He wrote music. He wrote our national anthem. Brilliant, brilliant man.
Right. And also we spoke in most of these episodes why some of the things that we believe made them to change these photographs or whitewash them, as we want to say. So
yes,
please stay tuned. This is big, Priscilla. This is big.
It is. It is. And I think it's selfless of Carl to to be going into. Can you imagine everything she just shared, what she had to go through to verify information? Because you want to make sure that you're adding value to on what is already being provided or existing. So it could be another perspective. It could be a better one. It could be, just giving people on the leeway to be able to do their own research and confirm or verify what you have to share. So the fact that she has to go through trying to find someone who can, do a facial, uh, uh, um, have some knowledge or expertise on how to match faces. I think that was just amazing as I listened to her explain, uh, 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 the process that she had to go through in order to make this presentation today, at least authentic to the extent to which someone wants to acknowledge that it is. So I'll just continue to say thanks to her. Yes, someone said call is amazing. I think she is.
Thank you. That leads us to our next slide. And Carl was able to even see this today on your timeline. Now we have the photographs of all the Liberian presidents.
Yes. I mean, I'm bursting with joy. I'm bursting with joy. They tried to bury these men. They didn't know they were seeds. They tried to bury them. They didn't know they were seeds, and they didn't know that one leg gift for Nimba County will come up one day and water the garden, and the seeds would grow again. Here we have them. They've been resurrected. They tried to erase them. We have brought them back. And so I am going to, I'm going to celebrate this. I'm going to celebrate this. I've shown this to my children, and I don't think that this is something that we should take lightly. I mean, it's funny because if this was any other country, if this was Ghana, if this was Nigeria, it would be a huge deal. We'd be talking about this all over the place. But Dennis, your platform is just as good. It's just as good. And my purpose for doing this is not it's not about me. It's about my children having what I didn't have, right? Which is the truth. I was raised on the half-baked story of our country. And I was raised with the disinformation about our country. I think everyone was. It was not until I started to do research for myself and I started to see who were the authors of the disinformation. And I started to look at the actual primary sources, and I started to see the disconnect. That I then said, no, this is something serious. We have to understand why our country got derailed. Why anytime you mention anything positive about Liberian history, it repulses the average Liberian. That is a classic sign of mass disinformation and a disinformation campaign that has caused Liberian people to despise their history and their heritage.
Yeah.
And it's unjustified. It is unjustified. There is no country that is in existence that has not had bad things happen, that has not had bad leaders. But if you look at the overall picture of Liberian history, as it truly was, it is triumphant. It is inspiring. It is something for us to be proud of, all of us. And, that is the goal here. So, I appreciate the thanks and all that, my sister Priscilla, but it isn't really about thanking me. I'm doing this because it is my passion. And I hope that in my little way, I've contributed something and inspire others to do their own research. But these are the presidents, and we start with Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Roberts had and I don't want to harp on this whole mulatto thing as we get into the presentation about Russell. I do want to let everyone know, being raised in the United States, there is really, this color divide is very superficial. Black is black is black is black, as we like to say. And if someone has a white father in this United States, they're still treated as a black person. They're still treated as an African. They're still slaves. They're still they would have still been enslaved. And even if you are only 25% Black or 1/8 Black or whatever it is, you would have still, one drop of Black blood made you potential property, human chattel. So I'm not on a campaign to erase the sons of white men. I just want the truth and their actual images to be revealed. And this also is evidence of the unity of so-called mulattoes and so-called full-blooded Africans. Because you will see as you look at this, Joseph Jenkins Roberts, Republican. Stephen Allen Benson, Republican, full-blooded African. Let me go back. Joseph Jenkins Roberts, Republican, white father. Stephen Allen Benson, full-blooded African. We've got Daniel Bashir Warner, also Republican, full-blooded African. James Briggs Payne, 75% African. 75% African, Republican Party. First True Whig Party, E.J. Roy, full-blooded African. True Whig Party again, James Irving Smith, full-blooded African. Roberts returns, Payne returns, Anthony William Gardner, African. Today we're on number 10, Alfred Francis Russell, who, based on my very meticulous genealogical research, we'll get into this, but I'm going to actually stop at number 10 just so it's not boring.
Right.
But number 10, Russell, is based on what I've assessed, is he was a 25% African, not 1/8 or 1/16 as people like to say. There's zero evidence of that. His mother's mother was fully African. So there's no way she could have been an Afroon as is described all over the internet. And this is one of the dangers of narratives being spun and respun. One person says something, everybody picks it up and runs with it. Nobody goes back to the records to verify. And because these people were slaves, their records were meticulously kept. Unlike those who were born free, people who were born slaves, you can really, because they kept property records, they were considered property. So you can go back and you can see at no time, was so this 1/16, Black thing shows up. A person who's 1/16 Black doesn't even look at all like they're even, they're complete European. You cannot even see any ethnicity in such a person. So I don't know why people have been running with that narrative for all these years. But that aside, we're going to talk about our President Russell.
Okay.
You want us to ask me questions before we go to the next?
Yes, please. Yes, because you mentioned his grandmother, but I want to clarify about the mother. The mother, are you saying she wasn't 1/8 Black?
She was not.
Okay.
That's what they're saying all over the internet. She was absolutely not. She could not have been 1/8 Black because her mother was fully Black. So she was a regular mixed-blooded woman. She was mixed. She was half Black.
Interesting.
Yes. And so that's what I said. We always have to go to the source, because if you just go and you're reading a secondary source, they have to cite where they got this from. There's no record being cited in these narratives. So I said, okay, let me go back and look at the Wycliffe farm, look at their plantation records, and see how this particular person was described.
Okay.
And that was what I did.
Thank you.
So
looking
she
at
came from the Irving plantation. On the Irving plantation, their records show that her mother was an African that was purchased as a child.
Yeah.
Okay.
So looking at the pictures now, from what we know, Priscilla, you want to go ahead, Priscilla?
No, I wanted to mention the primary sources. They didn't mention her childhood, except it was just from letters that she wrote to the mother wrote to the supposedly mother-in-law, or the
she wrote. Yeah, we'll get into that. We'll get into that in the presentation. She came from the Irving plantation. She was sold to her mother-in-law's plantation.
Okay.
So you have to go back to the Irving plantation to know who her actual biological mother was, because her mother stayed at the Irving plantation.
Yeah. Yeah,
So she was.
I'm saying, yeah,
Mhm.
that's why the sources that I read from, they didn't go back there. So,
Mhm.
uh,
Thank you.
not
So
much to
looking
It
at the
say.
takes a
pictures
lot of
now,
time. So it's
this,
not, yeah, it takes a lot of time.
this,
It would be great if I could just go and, look something up and it would be all in one place. But unfortunately, they don't have that kind of respect for our history. So we have to put it all in one place.
Yeah.
yeah,
I
okay.
mean, it
Yeah,
is very time.
you really do a lot of work that because even they have the patience to go through. I try to just do it quick through the Library of Congress. But then, so as I listen to you talk about the images, and I'm like, yeah, they almost took me through all of this. I didn't even know Cole was going to touch on that, but I was like, no, I'm not interested in his image or the portrait or picture. Because they wanted me to send my email to send it to my email. I said, no, I just want to do a quick read. Um, and I decided to ask for librarian, but it was taking too much time. So I like, I will wait for Cole to tell us this thing. That's what I keep saying. I know you say you're not doing it for thank you, but I think it's really a lot of time investment. I can. So you just have to have the love for this to do it. So and that's
Yeah,
what you do.
thank you. So based on growing up, the pictures that I used to, we have Joseph Jenkins Robert. We have had that picture. Stephen Allen Benson. That's one of Carl's contribution because the picture we used to for Stephen Allen Benson is light. Then the third, Daniel B. Warner, same thing. James S.
And
Payne,
well,
same thing. You
yeah.
know, so the three together, they are all being painted or light in most of the drawings that we are
Yeah,
used
to
to.
kind of try to fit that narrative that all the early presidents were mulatto. I don't really understand what kind of, divide and conquer, stuff was that, but clearly that, I mean, and then they tried to say the True Whig Party was the black people and the Republican Party was the mulatto people. Well, True Whig Party, have more light skinned people. I mean, in all fairness, it lasted longer, but you've got one person, excuse me, with a white father in the
Republic.
True Whig Party. You've got one person with a white father in the Republican Party, and that was it. There's no one else that was ever president of Liberia with a white father after that. Before, I mean, that was it.
Hmm.
So, everybody else was either like President Sirleaf, 75% black, like James Briggs Payne, 75% black, or 75% African, I should say. So Edwin Barkley, 75% African. So it's they, being light skinned doesn't mean that you're mulatto. Mulatto means you have one black parent and one white parent, or one European parent, one African
Yeah.
parent. So
So take note if you are looking at these pictures, this is brand new. Some of the photographs we have here are the actual ones. And so this is a discovery that we all need to be proud of. Thank you again. Let's go to our next slide and start on our president for the day, the 10th president, Alfred Francis Russell, 25 August 1817 to April 4, 1884.
yes. So President Alfred Francis Russell, he's the only president in Liberian history to have been born a slave. You remember when we do all these presentations, I say, oh, this president was born free, this president was born free, Roberts was born free, James Briggs Payne, all of them were all born free. Well, Alfred Francis Russell was born in captivity. He was the property of his grandmother and his step grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah, so I'm gonna this is a copy of a photograph of the actual plantation, that the plantation house, not the actual farm, but the plantation house, where Russell was born. He was born into slavery in 1817 in Lexington, Kentucky. He is the son of of Millie Crawford, who was considered a mixed race woman. She had one African parent, one European parent. She was born on the Irving plantation in Kentucky. So the father of Millie was supposedly the owner of the Irving plantation. And the mistress, or the woman who owned, who was married to the owner, sold her off because she was the biological child of her husband. Sold her off to another plantation in order to punish her mother. So there's this whole dramatic story about how she sold this woman's children. She had multiple mixed race children. This African woman had multiple mulatto children by her owner. And the wife would sell her children off when they reached a certain age. So just think about that trauma. You already being raped by the person who owns you. And then your children are taken and sold to different people. Because she did not want, the biological children of her husband reminding her of his obsession with the slave.
Yeah.
It's even worse than infidelity, because this is a situation where he's raping this woman.
Yeah.
She had no power to refuse his advances. This is worse than infidelity. It's rape. It's abuse.
It's abuse.
Because you don't have the liberty to say no, because you belong to that person. You're the legal property, they hold deed, they hold papers for you. So his wife, sold her children off. So Millie goes to a new plantation, and we'll go to the next slide.
Right, and Carl, because a few days ago, I think, I was thinking about buying a dog, right? And the idea came to me, and I was looking at pictures, and I was like, okay, you have a mother, and people are taking the children of this mother and selling them. And sometimes we talk about animal cruelty. So why, just thinking about this, that your husband is raping these women, African women, having babies, and you are selling them in cutting off this mother from her children, and you sell them away, they don't know where they are again. I mean, I'm trying to think about that, and my mind can't even wrap around that. You can't even treating animals like that today kind of make my heart to cringe. Next slide.
So now we're dealing with his biology. His biology is his paternal ancestry. So, of course, these were the wealthiest. So Robert Wycliffe was one of the wealthiest, definitely the most powerful of the Kentucky planters. He was extremely wealthy, powerful, owned over 200 human beings just in his main plantation. And he had many other smaller farms with mills and other things. He produced, grain, all kinds of things. And so he was one of the wealthiest people in Kentucky, if not the wealthiest. And certainly he was the largest slaveholder of his time. So just on the plantation that he was on, he had over 200 slaves at any given time, just to work the main plantation. So he married Mary Todd. He married her. He was her second husband. She was married once before, and she had a child named John Todd Russell. She was married to a Russell when she was very young. They had John Todd, and her husband died. She then married Robert Wycliffe, who married her at the time. It was rumored because she came from an extremely wealthy family. So he wanted to marry into her wealth. And later on, years later, her family tried to fight the family in Kentucky for her inheritance, and they lost. So he became extremely wealthy also by marrying this woman. They had no children together. The only child that Mary Todd had, that she had, was John Todd Russell. So this is her only child. And he was born in the year 1800. This is important because Alfred Francis Russell was born in 1817. Yeah. So he was basically a teenager when he fathered Alfred. So the woman on the left is Alfred's biological grandmother. The man in the center, photograph or drawn, not photographed, these are all portraits. This is John Todd Russell, who is the father of Alfred Francis Russell. He was only 17 years older than his son. He had his son with this biracial slave who was used as a house servant, a domestic slave in the home. So this is a very disturbing situation. He didn't even live in the property. He had actually come to visit his mother when he then raped the house servant. And she became pregnant with Alfred Francis Russell when she herself was just a teenager. So imagine being ripped from your mother, going to a new plantation, and being subjected to rape, violent rape. There are conflicting stories in some. Go ahead.
Before Carl go further, can I say, you see, some of the reason why one Carl is saying it depends on the source of where you're getting your information from and the intent and purpose. So when your colonizer or your quote unquote the masters, when they frame the story, do you see how they romanticize the story, or do you see how they tell the story? So that sometimes to cover all their own dirty deeds or the atrocities. So the account that I was mentioning through the letters, quote unquote, the letters from her Millie to her mother-in-law and Alfred's own letters to his step grandfather, says that this guy was her lover who would come from Princeton to come to visit, and they were lovers. But now Cole is telling us another perspective, and which could all be true, that someone doesn't have the power to negotiate anything. How do they even start a relationship on an equal level? So you weren't even living in the house. You come and you rape, because they were allowed to. I mean, they just did that, just raped the slaves, enslaved African women, and now we're being told in another account that they were actually lovers. And I'm hearing, we're hearing on this platform, no, she was raped.
They definitely were not lovers. It was a rape, and I was actually getting to the discrepancy in the story and the reasons for it.
Okay.
So I want to be able to do the presentation, and then you guys can, so the next slide. So this is the romanticizing of the relationships between these rapists and these mulatto women, right? They try to make it look like it is a consensual relationship. One of the reasons I believe that they tried to whiten her and make it look like she was only a quadroon is because if they had said she was half Black And these are very high society. These are some of the wealthiest people in the South. And you're trying to pretend that these people are not rapists. The only descendant of the richest woman in Kentucky, right? The only child of the richest woman in Kentucky, his only child is a product of a Black woman. So they have to say she's a quadroon to try to cover this up. But she certainly was not. Because had she been a quadroon, you would see no trace of Blackness in her son. He'd be 1/16. And there would have been no reason to send them to Liberia.
Yeah.
This situation was not romantic. He was also a drunk in the accounts that were explained about John Todd Russell. John Todd Russell was such a drunk that that's what caused his death at the age of 22. He was born on May 4th, 1800. He was such an alcoholic, a violent, spoiled, rich kid is how he's described. Very, very violent. Drank profusely. And he drank himself to death at the age of 22. Probably died of alcohol poisoning. The story goes that he consumed alcohol and you know, basically choked on his own vomit. So why would we want to believe that this is some beautiful romantic story? The whole narrative of him going to visit his mother, raping this woman, it is what it was. He was not a sweet kid. But he's buried at the Howards Grove Cemetery in Fayette County, Kentucky. That is a photo of his actual grave. And this is a very, wealthy Southern person. But he was a disgrace to his family. He died in shame. And Alfred Francis Russell is the only biological descendant of the richest woman in Kentucky. All of their descendants are through Alfred Francis Russell. Now, the husband has had children, and the husband, through him, there were other relatives. But this was the only grandchild of this woman. And that's important. I want you all to think about that for a minute. Any questions before we go to the next slide?
And that's why sometimes I ask about the connection, something that probably we've not emphasized a lot in Liberia, because the connection, if Alfred F. Russell, our president, descended from the richest woman in Kentucky, does the family, the Russell family in Liberia today have that connection? Anybody watching this show can tell us.
So we're going back. Okay, so as I always do, I go back to the ship records. So this is a brig Ajax that went to Liberia in 1833. You have Mrs. Wycliffe sold. Basically what she did was she emancipated all of these slaves that are on this list. Amelia Crawford, which is the father of Alfred Russell. The mother of Alfred Russell. Alfred's cousin Lucretia, and then there's her children, Cynthia, Henry, Gilbert, and George. So this was his entire family. He had no siblings. He had his cousins, he had his mother, and he had Lucretia and his cousin. And that was it. There were, no men. These are all children who were fathered by white rapists. And the only grandchild of the wealthiest woman in the state of Kentucky, the only grandchild of the wealthiest woman in the state of Kentucky, who had died 11 years earlier, Her son had died 11 years earlier. His only offspring, she puts on a ship and liberates him from slavery and puts him on a ship and sends him to Liberia. They did go to Liberia, as many of the mulatto emancipated slaves did, with resources. They were given money, they were given clothing and other tools and things that were necessary to start a life in Liberia. We've talked about the Uris and other families who were the descendants of white rapists and African women. They were sent to Liberia with some provisions, a little bit more than what the others had to go with. A lot of the free blacks had to, go with their own resources. But in this case, they were being liberated or being sent with things. And I must mention that they were really treated very kindly, considering the circumstances that they were born into. There's many letters that are written by even Alfred, especially Amelia, talking about how spoiled she had been and how she was well treated. Really because she was trying all she could to just gain some kind of favor. What ends up happening to them is tragic in Liberia. Most of them die, and I'll get into that with the next slide. But in this particular situation, it wasn't like with E.J. Roy and others who were self-determined and were going to Liberia ambitiously seeking freedom. They were born free and they were just going to be in Liberia so they could be self-determined freemen, as opposed to being free in a country that was still holding people in bondage. In this particular case, they grew up on a plantation where there was a hierarchy. They were not on the fields toiling away, picking cotton, putting grist into the mills of the plantation. They were not doing hard labor. They were in the home. They didn't live in the home, but they worked in the home. They got to eat better. And they were treated with more privilege than the people who were treated basically like animals out in the field. So typically this creates a mindset. In African American culture, they talk about the house Negro versus the field Negro. A lot of times the house Negroes were the people who were fathered by these rapists. So in this particular case, you have people who have been really spoiled and pampered. Now they're going into the rainforest of West Africa. Completely different climate from Kentucky. They have provisions, they're better off than many of the others that they meet there. But it is difficult and challenging. And there's malaria and tuberculosis. Next slide, please. Did I go over the names of the people that were there already? His cousins and everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Carl, it's important you mentioned that about unlike E.J. Roy and others who were born free, and they have this desire to go to Liberia. But here, they're coming from the plantation, you're getting freedom, put on a ship, and sent to Liberia.
Yeah.
And as we will see later, or maybe I need to preempt, was there a difference the way they acted, the way they behaved, or what they did when they got there because they were coming directly from the plantation? Do we know that?
Say that again?
Do we know? Because there was a difference, as we say in the African Americans say, the half slave and the few slave or the few Negro. So these people, unlike others who were born free, the Russell family came directly from the plantation and sent to Liberia.
Right.
So how was that different? Did they act differently from the rest of the people? What was it like?
Right. So Russell also, so yes, because they were, well, it's not just two types of people. You've got E.J. Roy, who was rich. He was wealthy when he went to Liberia. So his life was far more privileged than these people's lives. He was nobody's property. He owned a multi-story building. He was a businessman. So E.J. Roy that would be the pinnacle of high class in Liberia, because these are the people who were successful against tremendous odds in America and became more wealthy than the average white person, far more wealthy before going to Liberia. So Russell would not have been at the level of an E.J. Roy. And the other thing that happens when they get to Liberia, it becomes this great equalizer, because you have a lot of Black Liberians and a lot of other mulatto Liberians who are treated the same. They get, the plantation, they get what they're supposed to do. Russell's not used to working. He's not used to hard work. But before we get into that, let's talk about this slide, and I'll talk about his characteristics as well as we get on. But I wanted to first cover what happens to them when they get there, right? So
in 1833, Merritt Wycliffe emancipated Alfred, his mother Millie, his cousins Lucretia, that's Lucy Russell, and her 4 children, Cynthia, Gilbert, George, and Henry. Lucy, her daughter Cynthia, and 2 elder sons died in 1833. Cynthia died in 1836 and Gilbert in 1839. Alfred Russell also suffered this disease, which resulted by 1835 in his having to use a crutch. Russell's mother Millie married George Crawford, another immigrant. She died in 1845.
So this is what I wanted to talk about. So this is incredibly humbling. He is alone. He is alone. He has no cousins. He has no siblings. And when I talked about their soft life in Kentucky in comparison to other people who were emancipated that may have been field slaves, especially those who went to Sino, which were from Mississippi. Most of those were actual, hard labor slaves. These house people had, and he was also not full-blooded African. He was only a quarter Black. So these people suffered tremendously. They had no resistance to malaria, and they all died. And he became crippled from his illnesses. He walked with a crutch for the rest of his life, and he had no family. But he did eventually make his own, of course. But I wanted to we talk about all the tragedy and the deaths that occurred when people went to Liberia. The survival rate wasn't really that great. So a lot of people went, many did not survive, many do not have any descendants in Liberia at all. For many of the people who went, many of them have no descendants. Some of the people that are descendant from these people were adopted indigenous children, but that's a different show. This particular case, he was left alone because by 1845, his mother's now gone. He was also taken in by the church. And what ends up happening to him is there's rumors that start to circulate about his behavior. Let's go to the next slide, please.
Yeah, Carl, before I go, just to recap. So Merritt Wycliffe is Alfred's grandmother, right?
Yes.
I mean, and she's sending her grandchild, only descendant, away.
Yes.
Don't want anything to do with him.
And basically. And he really could have died. He really could have died. And fortunately for him, he didn't die. And fortunately for all his descendants, he didn't die, or they wouldn't exist today. So
because he was 15 when he got on the ship.
Yeah, he was 15 years old. So the other thing I wanted to point out, we were talking before I get to the rest of this, what's really important to point out about him is there's 2 things that happen. These guys all were interacting. He was friends with Stephen Allen Benson, and he was friends with all these people. These guys all knew each other. You think Liberia is small today? It was really small then.
Yeah.
So he's their he's their friend. All these guys were born around the same time. Daniel Bashir Warner was like two years older than he is, right? So these guys are all age mates, you know, age group.
Yeah. So Russell was trained to be a teacher after having suffered an illness that caused an injury in one leg. He later became an Episcopal priest in the St. Paul River area, where he had 200 acres in Clay Ashland. By
Yeah, so I meant
1837,
to say in the settlement of Clay Ashland, but yeah, in Clay Ashland.
by 1837, Russell was doing missionary work for the Methodist Church, and for the next 17 years, he served in various posts throughout Liberia. He was elected to the Liberian Senate and served as president pro tem of the Senate of Liberia. In 1881, he ran for vice president with Anthony W. Gardner, who won the presidency for a third term. When health issues resulted in Gardner's resignation 3 years later, Russell became president. Russell died 3 months after he left office on April 4, 1884.
Yes. So for whatever reason, we don't have any pictures of him as an older man. I find that just so crazy that all the pictures we have are from Augustus Washington, who photographed these guys by chance when they were young, before they became president. And while they were president, they may have been photographed. We just don't have the older photos of them, which is probably part of the reason they sketched these men the way that they did. It could be. But this basically caps his life. It was a very short presidency. He wasn't elected president. He was elected vice president. And he really was only covering the rest of Gardner's term. The last episode when we talked about Gardner, we talked about the whole land crisis and how Gardner basically had, I believe he had a stroke or a heart attack or something, because his illness is described as sudden and it was debilitating, and that is why he resigned. They try to say that they pressured him to resign. There really is no evidence of that. While they were very upset, the country and everyone was upset that they were not able to retain the Sierra Leone territory. There wasn't really much any president would have been able to do against the British at that time. The odds were against them, and that caused him so much pressure. I believe he must have suffered from some kind of stress or anxiety induced attack, whether it be a stroke or something like that, because it was like basically he fell off, as Liberian people would say, and ended up having to resign. And that is how Russell becomes president. So Russell was not elected as president. Just like Smith or Moses Blah, he was not elected. He took over after to fill a president's absence of the void. And while he was there, he was really fought against. There's a lot of things that I omitted from this presentation because the attacks on Russell were of his character, and they were accusing him of doing, in their words, deviant things, and that the Episcopal priests and others were trying to protect him and cover, whatever it is he was doing. So there's two things I'm going to be very careful with how I say. I don't know if Alfred Francis Russell was a homosexual, but much of the propaganda against him at the time, though they never used the term homosexual, was pointing in that direction. And that was one of the things that people were really against him for. And apparently this conduct was not evident to people until he became head of state. So I wanted to point that out. I was going to go into a little bit more, but I've decided not to. And then the second thing is he didn't do the best job as head of state for the short period that he served. He tried to continue the policies of Gardner. And unfortunately, after he left office, he didn't win, the election, of course, because of all the propaganda against him. He left office. He died shortly thereafter.
I have two questions, but the first one is let me go back to the one who Russell succeeded, Coleman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you said there was no evidence against Gardner that he was pressured due to the issue of the land issue with Sierra Leone, now
Mm-hmm.
Sierra Leone. So when I was reading that, the way they said it, I mean, I believe it right away. And I'm not asking you to teach me how to question things, but what would make you go beyond that? Because it makes sense to me that okay, they were having this land issue. Did he agree with how Russell or how Gardner handled it? So when I read that he was pressured to resign based on that issue, I not being a historian or a researcher like you, I mean, I was just okay with it and I stopped. But you are going beyond these things, and that's how you are finding these things. What made you go beyond that? It makes sense.
Because what made me go beyond saying that he resigned? I mean, I just read.
Like you want to see evidence.
I want to see if they're saying they pressured him to resign. I want to see where that happened. Who pressured him, and where are the letters, where are the communications? These people were meticulous with their record keeping, right? So if that happened, I want to see where they say that. And instead, what I end up finding is, oh my God, he got very sick. He probably, the way they describe his sudden illness, it sounds like he fell out.
Mm-hmm.
I read that
he couldn't continue. He couldn't continue, and he suffered tremendous heartbreak and grief over that boundary issue.
That's what I read.
Tremendous heartache and grief over that boundary issue. Nobody had to pressure him. He was pressuring himself. He was devastated. Yeah. You have to remember that Gardner, these guys are coming from that old school of African sovereignty, African liberation. That was Gardner, that was the remnant of that generation of African greatness, self-determination. These were the last torchbearers of the freedom struggle. After Russell, we're going to start to see some strange things happening in Liberia. We're going to start to see a lot of divisive disinformation, interference, much of the chaos and the liberation theology that Russell and these guys came out of. It starts to get twisted into, instead of it being African liberation theology, it now starts to become African demonization theology, where they're now teaching through the church, through Christianity, the demonization of Africa. Before this period, so this transition from Russell, it really marks a period of time, a shift also in paradigm, and a shift in the European tactics towards Africans. We talk about African liberation theology, and we've had a conversation about the slave revolts in the United States and Virginia. We've talked about so many things that have come out of this. Many of these preachers from as early as 1822, all the way up until this point, these Christian, African-American Christian and liberated Africans who were Christians and indigenous Liberians who converted to Christianity, their theology was very political, very African, very self-determination. We can do this. God wants us to be free. God wants us to be brothers. And all these Africans were all brothers. You hear all these speeches that they wrote and you can read them, but then something happens. Africa starts to look like a colony of economic opportunity for European countries to stop. So we're no longer going to bring slaves out. We're going to keep them there. We're going to enslave them where they are. But in order to do so, the strategy needs to change. We can't let these people keep telling each other that they have a right to self-determination. In order for us to achieve our goal, we have to crush this. This is where you start to see the paradigm shift in education and theology, because the two always go together, right? So if you're going to become literate at this period in history, the literacy is tied to religion. Before this point, religion was tied to liberation. Black American liberation theology. And that is the tradition that birthed, Martin Luther King and these people, right? These revolutionary preachers. Those are the preachers that were going to Liberia up until this point. But now the shift is going to happen. And now these Africans are not your brothers. These Africans are demonic. And as they Christianize and carry these missionaries into this place, they're also telling the Africans now, those people on the coast, they think they're better than you. This is your land. This is your true place. They're learning how to read, and they're being taught that their heroes look nothing like themselves. The people who look like you are bad. And it is meticulously documented. This is where it starts at this point. And we're going to talk about that when we talk about our next president, but we can go on to the next slide.
Call before you go, I said I had two questions.
Oh, sorry, Dennis.
Go into the aspect of Russell's alleged deviant behavior. Can you talk a little bit more, if you don't mind? No,
I do mind. And the reason I mind, Dennis, I struggle to even mention it. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's just so much. There's just so much of this mudslinging. Even when you go to the Liberia Herald, I mean, they were like writing trash about this man. So I had to mention it. I'm not going to completely leave it out, but my spirit tells me that a lot of this may have been too because of how he looked. This resentment, because majority of the population was not light-skinned. And if you look at the map of the presidents, they were not electing these people, right? They elected Gardner. Gardner's like, this is a smart kid. I'm going to bring him with me. He's going to be my vice president. Like, yeah, okay, whatever. He's just the vice president. He was in the Senate. He was pro temp. He did his thing, whatever. But now he's head of state. Oh, no. Now we're being headed by, a son of a white man. So they were really radically African at this point, too. So you've got these guys like, they were not really that trusting. And so the reason I don't want to get into it too much is just because I don't know how much of it was just propaganda, political propaganda. I mean, he obviously was married and had children. And I don't want this whole thing for everyone to just stick in their mind that he was some kind of, whatever. There's no way for me to be able to prove either way. I just needed to mention that was being said, and that it was probably politically motivated.
Probably. Priscilla, you were saying something?
It's okay. Carl can go ahead.
All right.
So he does have descendants. He's survived by many descendants in Liberia and West Africa as a whole. He's got descendants in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and of course the United States. He was the paternal great-grandfather of Clarence Lorenzo Simpson. Simpson was Barclay's vice president. Edwin Barclay, not Arthur. Edwin Barclay, the president just before Tubman. Yeah. So this is a little picture of the Simpson brothers. These are his great grandsons.
And you say he has descendants in Sierra Leone?
Yes, he's got descendants spread out all over the place. So he has, out of all the early presidents, he actually has the most descendants, biological descendants. That's why I'm like, what is this story about him? Whatever. Maybe he took somebody to Geffen and it was vexed. I don't know. I would rather talk about policy and things like that, but I really didn't want to, I left it off the slides. I just wanted it to be a footnote. So he had descendants, and these are his descendants of one of his daughters.
Yeah, because those kind of rumors are sometimes they are around people, right? Especially men. I mean, I have my own speculation, men, and he was a good-looking man, so he was probably intimidated by. I mean, he intimidated other guys, so they try to fight him. Maybe who knows?
I think, you know what, Dennis, go back to the picture of all the presidents. I think all of our presidents, man, we have nobody in Africa got better looking presidents than us.
Especially Daniel, man. Daniel is.
Yeah, I mean Daniel Bashir Warner and Daniel Bashir Warner. I wish I had had this photo when we did the presentation on him, but he was a handsome guy. I mean, I remember when we were in Save the State and we showed James Briggs Payne, and one of the members was like, "Oh, the man was ugly." He was joking. It was just like, but really, I mean, from Roberts all the way to Weah, the people are fine, man.
Right. I mean, I can see the resemblance between Stephen Allen Benson and myself.
I mean, if you're growing up in Liberia, if they had shown the actual photos of these presidents, we would have all, even we the native children that were lastly incorporated, we that came from the North Central Territory, Nimba, Lofa, Bong, Granjita, these places that were lastly incorporated in 1964. If we had seen these pictures all our lives, we would have seen the kinship. I don't care that Daniel Bashir Warner was born in Brick City, Baltimore. He looks like my brother, right? And I don't care if Stephen Allen Benson, was born in the United States and came here when he was 5 years old, or he looks like one day man, right? So we would have seen our reflection in our people, as we should have, and I think as we initially did. I mean, Tubman looked like Gribble Man. Yeah. We know where he came, his people came from, but he looked just like any other Gribble Man. Look at the glasses and look at Dennis' glasses. I mean, come on. So anyway, so that basically wraps it up. I went a little bit over. I was trying to keep it brief. If anyone has any questions, his presidency was very short-lived, so there's not a whole lot of events that occurred. That's why I spent a lot of time on his genealogy, and I thought that was important, him being the only president to have been born into slavery, that we talk about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, this is the Liberia History Channel. Your presenter, Carl, Samuel, my co-host, Priscilla. If you want to be part of the discussion, please call the number on your screen, 605-313-6004. The code is 791-403#. Sometimes it is a teleconference number. If you call that, they charge you 1 cent per minute. I too call that number. So every time I'm having a show, if I'm on there for 60 minutes, I'm paying 1 cent per minute. That's $1. So if you can call for at least 20 minutes, and if you stay there 20 minutes and you feel that you wasted your money, please call me. I will give you the 20 cents. If you want to call and be a part of this conversation, it is very, very important. Priscilla? Yeah, I thought you wanted to say something.
No.
Oh, all right. So Carl, let's go up to the. I know he said he was trying to kind of follow the policy of Gardner.
Yeah. So I mean,
what were some of the things that he did, if you remember?
Well, it wasn't really much, right? So he's Gardner. If you want to go back to the Gardner episode, but it was really not a very eventful presidency. He was just trying to continue what was already there. A lot of times when a vice president takes over when a president has left, they just continue the person's legacy. They try to run again on their own before they start to push. And I really don't believe that Russell, his intention was to have to deal with the backlash and the fight that he had to deal with. Most of his presidency was spent pushing agriculture and trade because he was a planter himself. And most of the people in the House and the Senate were planters. They had massive plantations and farms, and the agriculture was the industry for Liberia, the primary industry. So those were the policies that he advanced, or not advanced, but continued from Gardner's time, making sure that there were equitable and fair trade agreements, and that they were also. I wanted to point out, this is important. Thanks for asking the question, because it made me remember something. Because of Russell's appearance, he commanded a bit more respect from the European traders, which is absurd, but that is the reality of the time. There were also many of the very wealthy elements of the population in Liberia were very light-skinned, and many of the wealthiest and largest farmers were also sons of white men. We talked about the mulatto class. They were not necessarily in politics like Russell, but they were influential because they had money and resources. Part of what outraged the majority population, which was recaptured Africans, incorporated indigenous people, and African-American descendants, what outraged them is they felt that Russell's policies were leaning towards benefiting, or one of the rumors they spread was that his policies were leaning towards benefiting the light-skinned upper class of the society. I haven't seen evidence of it, but it's something to look into some more to just see if there's proof that that is actually true.
Another thing, call, because, and maybe it's about vice presidents, that people will choose vice president, for political reasons, of course. And sometimes when these presidents take over, like what we heard, and I don't want to be political here, this is history, where vice president will say, "Oh, I was packed and this and that." Or people don't feel the vice president has qualified, and so when this person takes over, they're not being really respected, or people don't think that is, they're really up to the task based on how, or the reason for which they were being picked.
Russell was probably a strategic choice. I mean, having been in the Senate, when he was in the Senate, he was really pushing for the cause of these large plantation owners. I think Gardner chose him strategically so he'd get the support of some of these wealthy, I don't like the word mulatto, but we're using it in historical context, mulatto planters of Liberia. He got their financial support because he took Russell as a vice president. There's no way Russell would have been elected on his own strength, because most of the people in Liberia were, looked like us. Most of the people in Liberia were not descendants of Europeans. So, and that was a real thing. It was the color divide did exist. There was a bit of a classist issue going on, and that kind of gets exacerbated, when you have people who think that their proximity to whiteness, their proximity to being European makes them better than other people, because this is an era that really white supremacy was the mantra. I mean, it still is to this day. The doctrine of white supremacy is something most of the world has swallowed and is just living with as if it is just a reality. It has taken hold in the 19th century. And unfortunately, in Liberia, it did cause some issues. But again, the presidents themselves were being elected by the population, and so they reflected what the population looked like, as you can see from the photos. Because after Roberts, everybody pretty much was Black, right? Until you get to the 20th century, and very Black too.
If you are watching us on the big screen, on your big screen TV at your house, on YouTube especially, please send us the photo. This one comes from Elvis Morris, who is watching us on the big screen. At this time, I have few callers call who want to participate, and we really love it when our viewers call in, and we're going to be reading comments too. So let's take a few callers here. Our first caller is Elvis Morris. Elvis, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Josh, and big thank you to Ms. Famula. She usually do a great job with these presentations, and I think this one is by far one of the best ones I've seen. I think it's quite riveting, especially with history leading back to his time on the plantation. That's something that we read about in America in the history books, but seeing that we had a president who had a history like that is quite interesting. But I just want to make a suggestion, and perhaps because I think as we go down the line, we're going to get to some presidents who are quite have some deplorable character flaws. Like again, it might be a rumor, like the thing with Tolbert, where he had this thing with little girls. He liked little girls. The thing with we have right now, where he's like a serial womanizer. The same thing with Dole and Taylor. They had countless girlfriends. So these men who are presidents were flawed. And sometimes I think if you're going to give the history, you can give the full history, with the good and perhaps some of the bad, whether you agree with the accusations or not. But I think some of these men were actually flawed men and have some proclivities that we would probably look down on now in this modern day. But overall, it's an excellent presentation. And I think, doing the research that she usually does is really, really great for this platform. She's one of the gems on this platform. And sometimes I call her and I can be, agitating or annoying, but really I appreciate her. And I think most of us who watch her presentation, we appreciate her a lot. Thank you for taking my call, Mr. Jack. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Jamie Weeks, you trying to call and the number is giving problem, or if that continues after the call, when all the callers are there, you can call my direct line. We want you to participate. Let's get the next caller, and that's Riverside Pro. Go ahead, Riverside Pro, aka Abraham Vinton.
Yeah. How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Thanks for calling.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Cisco. I've been following the show religiously. Great information. My question has to do with this raping, grabbing the mothers from the field, from the home, and raping them and producing these mulatto children. Now, fast forward in the 21st century, I noticed a lot of places I work. The mulatto, they have more, when it comes to acceptance, they have this, spirit of acceptance. A lot of times they are easily considered over us, the dark-skinned people. So it says some form of, are they, like the white people, are they doing this based on, is there some compensation? Are they trying to pay back for what they did to this mother, or is it just genuine love that they created because they see these mulatto people as part of their own bloodline? Is it a bloodline thing, or just that they want to put them in places, to substitute or to compensate for what they did to their mothers? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, River says. Call will respond at the end. Let me bring in Ayume Julate Katel.
Hello.
Hello, Ayume. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, first of all, for you, Jenny, for your platform. And Priscilla, thank you. I enjoy you there too. And Sister Kao, I was just saying, Yama, the people and Sister the Abao. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the show. Like, I don't ask many questions because you can already tell me everything. You already tell me. But I wanted to ask, like, do you think because of what he went through, the many privilege he had on the plantation, do you think it gave him a kind of air amongst his peers when he was amongst them?
You said if it gives him an edge.
Yeah, a sense of a little bit of I'm better than or I'm arrogant kind of thing that I'm light skinned, I'm a little bit more better than you kind of a thing. Do you think it gives him that? Because it sounds like he had a lot of issues with his mates, you know? So I'm just asking if he had a little bit of air. Like we see today, I'm saying that because I see that today with those mulatto girls. I had a lot of friends like that. I had to put them in their place, you know? So just asking if we think it was like that. And thank you again. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And also, as you may, sometimes there is a perception about people, mixed race. Sometimes we too call them by different names because I have people in my family like that, and they are some of them are the sweetest people you will meet. But we sometimes look, especially the women, we sometimes look at them, in a different way, which is not nice. I can't even repeat it.
No, I have never had that problem with any of my mulatto friends. Never have I had that problem. But the problem, some of them have, because the people, most people think like, oh, when somebody's mulatto, the more beautiful, I got a big mulatto, So it gives, humans are like that. It gives us that air already there. Yeah. But the prettiest here. Like, example, you're sitting somewhere, and like those days when we were in Auckland, and we're sitting down with mulatto girls, but I'm a pretty black girl. And this guy would look on the table, and you tell me he's looking at you. Hell no. When many of you are looking at me too, that's kind of an air. Yeah. That you're entitled because your life, because people see them that.
Right. Thank you.
People see them that, but thank you.
Thank you. let me take Prince. Prince, you are alive. That's Prince. I don't see the long name again. Your Kula Yeni and all that. Go ahead, Prince. You're live. Good.
For your business, I gotta change my phone carrier, man.
Okay.
Now I'm able to call you now. All the time I had a phone carrier, I couldn't get through. I had to change to AT&T. Now I'm getting through.
That's great. Doing that for Mama Liberia.
Yeah, but it was such a great. It is not such a great show. There's a wonderful discussion. His history, at his death. And Cole, how you doing, man? Thank you so much, man.
You're welcome.
Cole, are you hearing me?
Yeah.
I hear you. You're welcome.
Yeah, I want to hear a few voice. I thought you had Dennis' voice. Thank you very much for such a vast knowledge and research. And I'm glad that you are digging deeper into this because all these the history are not taught in schools, and we are not exposed to these sort of things. And as a result of that, we have a splinter society, and we still have the division that is among us today. Some other thing is unique, and it started yesterday or today, but it's been something that has been underlying, something that has been in the society for a very long time. And I know there are some discussion that will be here that will be very sensitive. I'm related to the Russells. Yeah, my family people, the Collins, Russells. And you brought that issue about that smell campaign that was carried out against Russell. I'm glad that you cleared the air and know that it was a smell campaign. As a decent family man, but because of the same kind of politics we have today, what people will use whatever they can to get some political edge, even if they can't go at you with any other factual things, they will get with you with infactual and misinformation and disinformation. But we do know about that smell campaign that was used against our family men, and it was indeed a smell campaign of lie, because you're a decent family man who had his family. But like you said, it was a fight between the colonial power interfering within the Africanization theology and trying to. I mean, you just put everything into perspective. And I hope that these sort of things will be focused on Africa. We all can look around and see how we can incorporate these things to the teachings information that has been disseminated in Liberia on the radio, what we can interact. But I just want to say to you, Cole, thank you very much. And Dennis, thank you guys so much for persevering and keep pushing. I know you guys may not be having the numbers because our people nowadays are not too careful to get something that is educating. They want entertainment, they want drama, they want emotional things, they want divisive things, they want things that will tear people apart. So we go on other shows, we spend hours there with a lot of people on that show, but at the end of the day, we don't get the kind of resourceful and rich information that Cole is giving here. So we might be 35 years, we might be 100 years listening, but it's a powerful message, and I really appreciate you guys for what you're doing. Keep on the good work. God bless you guys. Cole, thank you so much. God bless you too.
Thank you.
God bless Liberia and save the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take our last caller here, and Christopher Roti Tobasi. Chris, go ahead, sir.
Mr. Dennis, thank you very much. And I just wish Prince could continue to be like this metal instead of, because when you leave from this platform, you'll go and start spilling venom and all type of hateful rhetoric and stuff
man,
like that.
let's talk about Russell.
But anyway, let's get because he got in, they are politicians.
No, let's talk about our program, please.
But anyway, Mr. Dennis, the good thing about history for me, I like straight history. I like it raw. I like it the way it is. Whether it will hurt feelings, but at least it will get us somewhere. For somebody to say that one smell is better than the other smell, let's just be real for a moment. All right, people wrote these things, they put it in the history books, and we're teaching our children all over the country, right? Everywhere. I'm talking about stories like Marcella Newport, killed 600 strong indigenous warriors and stuff like that. We didn't write it. They wrote it. They wrote it to glorify their own people. It is their story. And then when we are telling their story and people want to say smell campaign and all that stuff, they wrote it. They taught us this history. Today they want to run from their own history. So bring it as it is. Raw, it will hurt feelings, but no problem. Take for example, I always say, Dennis, Liberians, we are most of all are not honest people. Take for example when it said that, and this is for example, right? When it says Samuel Doe, there is 600 Nima children in the well. Mr. Dennis, how many children can stay away? How long does the bone lie? Have we taken science?
I have a family member who was a victim of that, and I'm not going to let anybody do that.
I'm just saying that because
Dennis, I'm going to leave your show if you continue this.
Let's come back.
I did not come on here for this. Dennis, I ain't come on here for this. So I have certain triggers. Dennis, you need to cut this show off. Just call it off.
All right.
I'm not gonna. Yeah, I can't do that. You can't have me doing research to present information and allow people to come on and spew all this rubbish. It's not fair.
All right.
We gotta learn how to cut people off. That's unacceptable. Denying war crimes that were committed against people, that's not what this platform is about. So we are going to stick to the topic.
Right.
When people call in, if you didn't pay attention to the show and you don't have anything to discuss about the show, please don't call. I did a presentation. The callers are supposed to call in and discuss the subject matter, not to come in here and spew their hatred and their frustration. I don't have time for that. So,
Jimmy, so let's go ahead and you can if you have time, you can respond to the other callers.
So the first caller that called in, do you recall which one? I want to try to do them in order.
Right. First, let's do Ayumel, who said, this. Let's start with Ayumel. whether being mixed made Russell to have some level of arrogance and entitlement mentality.
So it's a complicated situation. While Russell received a lot of favor from the church, a lot of the others did as well, right? He wasn't the only pastor. I think if you compare him with Daniel B. Warner, Warner was very poor when he went to Liberia. He didn't have anything and he had to work his way up from nothing. Russell went to Liberia with resources. So he had money, he had clout, but he was also an orphan for all intents and purposes. He had no family, everybody died. He was born a slave. So people who were born free, in a sense, look down on those that were born into captivity. Right? And then just because Russell was more radical and about African liberation, and many of the light-skinned people were more radical about African liberation than you would have ever imagined. I mean, even right here in the United States, you've got, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., you've got some of the most radical, revolutionary African people had white fathers or had European, a lot of European ancestry. So to just say that because someone's father was white or because someone may have been privileged because they were white meant that they did not see themselves as African as everyone else, I completely disagree with that. It just depends on the individual. There were indigenous people who became westernized early on, even before Liberia was a republic, when it was still a commonwealth. And some of them, became clergy and teachers. And some of them were more anti-African, being born of indigenous people. Some of them were more anti-African and radically, suppressed African culture than some of the people who settled. So it really is not appropriate to paint people with a broad brush. There's no evidence from anything that Russell wrote to suggest that he saw himself differently from everyone else. Now, he is an individual. There's nothing in his writings. He married a Black woman. Unlike J.J. Roberts, right? So Russell's descendants, he didn't keep his descendants, he married, his descendants were much darker than he was. And these are some of the things that we need to start looking at as a people. We really have a tribalist mind. And we have to learn to stop attributing people's conduct, the mentality, to the way they look, to the language they speak, the part of Liberia they come from, to their ancestry. Stop attributing people's character to things that they have no control over. It's a very slippery slope. So what I'm going to say to you is, AMA, I have seen no evidence that he was arrogant and cocky. I have seen evidence that he was a radical Africanist, like Gardner, by continuing those policies, that he wanted that the trade relationship between Africans and Europeans was equitable. Nothing that he's ever written that I've seen, and there would have been no reason for him to hide it, where would suggest that he was anti-African or that he didn't see himself as an African, even though he was only a quarter African. He consistently referred to himself in common with his colleagues.
Thank you. Then the next question came from Elvis, who said, when we're talking about Russell and we don't want to go through deep in the other side, he said, well, some of these presidents have some feelings, and so when we get there, we want to talk about it.
Right. So what I do is I find evidence. If there's enough evidence to support something, then I will say so. If there's not, I'm not going to say so. So that's all I'm going to do. I'm not here to regurgitate rumors. People lie a lot. People tell things are politically motivated. If there's evidence of whatever the statement is, I will say, yes, here's the evidence. In this particular case, the only reason I mentioned it is because it is cited by multiple people in multiple but they're all his enemies, right? There's no situation where you have a friend of his or a priest or even he himself asserting any of these ideas. It's always the people that wanted him removed from office. So that is important to note. And the only reason I brought it up is because I did see it in multiple cases. What else what was the other question to address? So Elvis, I'm not going to come here and present things that I don't have evidence of. None of us were alive at that time, so we can only go off of what the written record shows. Not what we imagine, not what we're going to pretend that we thought happened, but what do we actually see evidence that occurred.
Thank you. Let me put a few comments here. This one from Miguel Derek. There is an older sketch or photograph of Alfred F. Russell in the Symbol of Liberia by Charles Lorenzo Simpson. His memoir, who was vice president under President Tubman and who was a great-grandson of President F. Russell. Alfred Russell appears with a white beard. And when you say white, was it gray hair or Miguel? Or
yeah, that picture is what, if you Google him, that's what you also see. I have that picture here in my archives too. I didn't use it because that picture is from 1952. Excuse me. That picture's from 1952, and we know that those pictures were not very credible.
And Pansy, I'm going to keep watching this channel. I love the history, and it's very nice to know about the country. Every president up to CDV King had normal terms. His term was an unusual one, a 10-year term. I don't know whose term you're talking about, because
people are re-elected to office, and so that person's mistaken.
Right.
He didn't have one 10-year term.
Prince said, why is Moses Blah not counted as president as Russell? And let me go back, Prince. Prince, there you have Moses Blah. So Moses Blah, of course, is counted. I can answer that one. So Moses Blah is counted as president. That's why we have 25. This is rather than extensive to know his background and his maternal lineage being linked to slavery. Then he becomes the leader of a free black nation in Africa. I really hope he was a kind man. I think he was. All right.
I mean, he was only president for a few months.
Well, like
yeah, I think what I want to say, kind of the tone of our mindset, and as African people, we have to always ask ourselves, why do we think the way we think? Why are we more repulsed with people that look like us than we are with Europeans who actually enslaved us, right? And why is there's this hatred for ourselves and our people? And we think we're being so radical. We think we're saying something good when we say, oh, the people came, they enslaved us. I mean, what you're doing is you're being the torchbearer for not only a false narrative, but a narrative that was created specifically to destabilize your country. And it's unfortunate because they repeat this and they use this as like their whole world view about themselves and their country. You have to take a step back and use your common sense. You know, what was the other question again? I'm sorry. There was another question that was similar that I wanted to answer. I think it was River Sus or someone like that. Do you remember the question he asked?
No.
Okay, I should have kept notes. I didn't realize that many callers were going to call in. If I haven't answered your question, please type it into the comments so Dennis can remind me. I apologize.
River Says Pro was also talking about this. It's from they say the way some white relate to mulattoes or mixed, is it because they are trying to feel sorry for them because they were the one who uh, raped their mothers to have mulatto children? Is that why? Is it because sometimes where you work, they will prefer the mulatto to the dark skin? So
Okay,
is it a way of
that was
saying,
the
oh,
question I
we're
wanted
sorry
to
for
answer.
what we did to your parents?
I don't see that. I mean, in
Yeah.
America, they talk about house Negroes and field Negroes, but the truth of the matter is, in practice, those things have really been exaggerated. In practice, you see mulatto people marrying very dark-skinned people, not only in Liberia, but in the United States, all over the place. It's very difficult to keep us apart. It's the same thing in Liberia. It's, oh, they didn't like that it was apartheid, but everybody had a native wife or an indigenous husband. Everybody got intermarried. There's nobody that is alive in Liberia today who is a descendant of repatriated African Americans and not also a descendant of indigenous people. Nobody today is alive under those circumstances. You go to South Africa where they actually had apartheid, there are full-blooded white people that have been in South Africa since the 1600s because that's apartheid. That is not integrating with the population. But here in Liberia, just to debunk this whole apartheid thing, people got intermarried. Apartheid means it's illegal for you to marry each other, to go to school with each other, to interact with each other. There has never been a school from the very first school built in Liberia that did not accommodate indigenous children.
Okay.
So some of these things need to be handled. Before your other caller called and started going off on his tirade with his hate speech, he did raise an important question, which was the situation with the Matilda Newport stories. He said something that's relevant and needs to be addressed, which is they created these stories, meaning they, I don't know who he thinks was the Liberian historian that created the Matilda Newport story. But most of these history books and these stories were written by American consultants, right? A. Doris Bank Henry's was American. A lot of white Americans, a lot of, one African American, which is A. Doris Bank Henry's, but the rest of them were really missionaries that came up with these stories and wrote our curriculum. And after 1900, most of these missionaries that were writing our story and writing our curriculum were from the Jim Crow South. Mm-hmm. And you also have to understand, which is a very important point, you've got these 19 people that are coming after 1900. Everyone's going to the same school and being fed the same stories. So even the descendants, we're talking about Russell. So even the descendants of Russell were fed these bogus stories that were created mostly by missionaries from the antebellum South. What are they going to do? They're going to glorify themselves. And it's interesting because what they start to do is they start to create this kind of cowboy and Indian narrative that they brought with them from the United States, these southern white missionaries. Yeah. And so we're getting away from liberation theology. We're getting into this place where getting around the turn of the century, they start to push this narrative. It's like a cowboys and Indians narrative. And there's a cannon and it fires off and it kills all these Indians. Native Africans, that's what they were. It's the same kind of nonsense that they did in the United States. So they were echoing it there. We know that didn't happen. We know Matilda Newport was Matilda Spencer. We know she fired no cannon. A few episodes ago, we discussed what actually happened in that battle. It was a massacre. The indigenous people had guns and they killed and maimed a lot of people. They took Stephen Allen Benson into and other children and took them away. It was a disaster. So they recaptured this. They repainted the story. Everyone's dead that was witness to the events when these stories are being made up. So the children, the descendants of the African Americans and the indigenous children, everybody's being fed the same false narrative. Imagine what that does to the psyche and what people are starting to think. So if I am a descendant of Russell and this is what I'm being fed, or if I'm a descendant or I am who I am, I'm called from Ganta and this is what I'm being fed. it starts to create an atmosphere of distrust. You don't know anything else, that there's always been some kind of hatred, that people just came and fired a cannon and decimated us and put us into slavery. It's not realistic, and that's not what happened. And so I want us to think rationally and also go back to the primary sources and study for yourselves.
Thank you. Richardson Pay say, this is really great. Glendy Genius, this is big. I wanted to make sure I watch it tonight and express my gratitude for doing this. Last question here from Riverside Pro. Do you think these misrepresentations were deliberate? Why wasn't ratification made years ago? Why did great professors and historians still follow the old narrative? I think when we're talking about those photographs.
Mm-hmm. He was saying if the photographs was deliberate. I it's hard to prove, but I do know that they saw the photographs and they made them whiter. I've said repeatedly on the show why I think they did it, but there's no way to prove that because nobody documented why they whitened the presidents. The effect, however, whether it was intentional or not, is the same. It creates a situation where we have a disconnect from the people who created the first leaders of the country. And it does have a psychological impact. If you are a Black child and you think that everyone that ever has done anything great has had a white father, has not looked like you, it's like what they did with ancient Egypt, right? You tell everybody, oh no, the ancient Egyptian leadership, they were all white. Yeah, there were Black people in ancient Egypt, but they were all slaves. That lie that they've told people, right? The African people haven't ever done anything great. That creates a self-esteem issue among African people.
Yeah.
So I think that might have been some of the motivation for whitening all of these men. I mean, Daniel Bashir Warner, if his picture had been, available with all of the tremendous accomplishments he made and his genius, he was a shipbuilder, he was all these things. If they had shown him looking like any old Bassa boy or somebody from Grand Jita or somebody from Cape Mount, or that would give young children in the country like, wow, I look like Daniel Bashir Warner, I could be great like Daniel Bashir Warner. We say it all the time, representation matters. We had the representation and they erased it.
So Riverside Pro is asking about Daniel B. Warner. I mean, is asking about Alfred F. Russell. Alfred F. Russell was. He said, why wasn't he re-elected? Who's the he?
Russell. I think maybe he's asking about why Russell wasn't re-elected.
Yes.
I'm trying to read through these myself. Let me see.
Yes, that's what he's asking. That is what he's asking.
Okay.
I'm saying yes. That's why he's asking.
He's asking why. I'm sorry, say that again. I apologize. I was reading some other question.
Why he asked.
Right. Russell did not run, right? So you let people run for president. He said, why was Russell not re-elected? He served 1883 to 1884. Couple of months.
he actually lost. He actually lost. Maybe it's because they were not in the entire history of Liberia. If you want to say Roberts was elected, I mean, that's debatable. We can have a whole show on whether or not Joseph Jenkins Roberts was ever actually elected by a majority of people. But let's give him, he's the first president. Let's say he was elected fairly and besides Roberts. And when he took power after Smith, that I've already said was not an election. Besides Roberts and Russell, there were no mulatto people. Nobody with a white father has ever been elected as president of Liberia. Russell was vice president, so you can technically say he was elected, but they didn't put him in the head of the office. And then J.J. Roberts really was just, you know, hey, you were already governor appointed by ACS. Here's the presidency because you have experience. So that was sort of orchestrated by ACS, and he stayed there way too long. And what did they do? Stephen Allen Benson, black like me, right? And then after that, everybody is pretty much black until you get to Russell, which was an accident. So I don't think the majority of people living in the Republic wanted to be ruled by the son of a white man. There really was a divide in the population. They really had distrust. And it starts to get exacerbated as time goes on.
Thank you. Well, time is fast spent. Let's see what we got for the rest of the week. Tomorrow at 12 noon, join us for a new day, 16 days of activism, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. A new day is a program here on Focus on Liberia, hosted by Priscilla J. Nanto. Priscilla will be having Massa Washington as guest to talk about the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Every year, you and I believe Priscilla will talk to you about that more. Set aside time for activism against gender-based violence, 16 days. And so come tune in 12 noon tomorrow or 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time to watch the New Day with Priscilla. Then at 6 o'clock, a new show has come on Focus on Liberia, Hello Pastor, with Reverend Dr. Chandler G. Freeman. Hello Pastor is a sit down with Reverend Freeman to answer some of the thought-provoking questions about the Bible and the Christian faith you don't want to mix. Every month, we have the Liberian Study Association monthly scholar series. This is one time a month. This Sunday at 7:30, Jackie Saye and Dr. Samuel Wade Johnson will sit down with Professor Emmanuel Orishi Jaffo, who is a professor and chair of the Department of Political Science at North Carolina University. It's happening right here on Focus on Liberia at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, tomorrow, Sunday. Tune in and keep your dial right here, Focus on Liberia, where we educate, we elevate, and promote all things Liberia. Carl, Priscilla, thank you so much for the show. It's time to close it. Let me get from Priscilla and then Carl for your closing comments as we draw down the curtains.
I appreciate the invite to be a part of this program. I always learn from the History Channel, from Carl, and it just it might sound like overstating one thing, but that's just the truth. You know, there are a lot of information out there and alternative sources. It's always good to just get the kind of the quality of information that we get from the History Channel. And this is only possible because Carl invests so much time, so much time, so much time. So I just appreciate that I can be a part of this exchange. And thanks to Carl and thanks to you, Dennis, for making me a part. And thanks to our viewers as well.
And thank you for that great addition to the Liberia History Channel. Carl, closing remarks?
Yes, I want to say thanks for everyone who watches and supports the show and has, you know, constructive questions and suggestions and feedback. And Priscilla, I appreciate you. Thanks for helping this evening. Please continue to join us next 2 weeks from today, not next week, but the following week. We are going to be on President 11, which is Hillary Richard Wilmot Johnson, Hillary Johnson, our 11th president, who served from 1884 to 1892. During that period is a period of the Berlin takeover of Africa, the European takeover of Africa, and there's a lot of interesting things that start to happen during President Johnson's tenure. So it's going to be interesting. Please tune in, and that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Priscilla. I want to thank our viewers for watching, and even those who will watch later on all social media platforms. Thank you, as always. We end with our song that says, "We are all Liberian." Have a good night, and God bless you.
Thank you.
We are Liberian. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.